So with healing in nature in mind, 9 members of our community agreed to share their personal stories in our Healing in Nature feature this year. Today, you will hear from a few of them. First, I'd like to introduce Sharon Hussar.
I am here.
Okay, Sharon is a speech therapist that uses nature in unique ways, and she is also a volunteer for Berks Nature through our Berks Nature Ambassador program. So she does a great deal for us and her clients. And Sharon, I invite you to share your story.
Sure. I was first introduced to Berks Nature a couple years back when I first became familiar with their nature play zone. I happen to be a pediatric speech and language pathologist working in early intervention. So I work with children ages birth to 3 through Right Start Children's Services based out of Douglasville. I have found over the years working with this population, I've seen fewer and fewer kids getting outside and moving, and so many more kids just linking up with screen time. The kids are watching TV, they're watching videos on their phones, they're watching videos on their laptops, their notebooks. I mean, you name it. I know it's hard to believe, but there are 2-year-olds in charge of their own screen time today. So I kind of made it a mission to start getting my families outside and get them outside playing instead of in front of a screen. So I started meeting families over at the Nature Play Zone, and pre-COVID, it was a huge hit. I was meeting families there regularly on a weekly basis. That came to a halt last March. But that's how I first became familiar with Berks Nature, is really through my work. So it's actually a special place for me in my professional life and in my personal life. So once the pandemic hit in March and things kind of came to a halt, I was no longer allowed to see my families in person. And we were kind of in a transition period of moving from in-person visits to virtual visits. And during that time in the spring, when I was first making that transition, I found out from Tammy and Caitlin, there's a Earl Pool Sanctuary, not 5 minutes from my house, which is a Berks Nature property. So I decided one day just to drive over there and take a look, and I fell in love with it. I found myself at Earl Pool Sanctuary, which was now renamed Bob's Woods at Earl Pool Sanctuary. Found myself there every day exploring a new trail. It's not a large trail system, but it's small and manageable. So I found every time I went there, every day I was able to explore a different area of the property. And I do have my favorite trails. I don't have them memorized. I think one of them's the Orange Trail. But I found myself over there. No matter what I was doing, I would hop over there at least for an hour. I just found to be very healing and peaceful, and a place where I could really just escape from the worries of the world and kind of all the craziness and chaos that was going around us. I could remove myself from that and just go to Earl Pool Sanctuary. I usually spend at least an hour over there, and it's a really it's a very unique place. As what I noticed, as it's a neat place to, I think Sarah had mentioned this when we were at the ribbon cutting ceremony a couple weeks ago. It's a neat place to go and watch the seasons change. Because when you're on the trails in the spring and things are just starting to turn green, is a completely different feel later in the summertime, when as all you see is green. And then in the fall, when you see the fall colors. And now that the trees are bare, it takes on a whole nother unique perspective. So it's a neat place to go and enjoy the different seasons. I don't find myself over there as often as I used to, but I do like to still visit it. I try to go over at least weekly. And I've just found great solace, and it truly was my sanctuary during a very tumultuous time when we were first starting to have our shutdown. So that's my story. It's very special to me personally and professionally.
Thank you, Sharon. That's terrific. I don't know about others, but I certainly have a few questions that popped up, but maybe I'll hold them until later on at the end of the program when we have some time built in for that.
Sure.
We appreciate your participation. Next, I'd love to invite Linda Bloom to share her story. Linda is a pediatrician at in the Tower Health System and assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics for Drexel University College of Medicine. Most importantly, she is a mama and happens to be the mama of one of our favorite nature preschoolers, Ari. So we're really interested in her professional and personal story and why she turns to nature. So Linda, could you please share your story?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So my story actually begins by the lack of nature in my life. My husband and I grew up in New York and came here for my job. And that was about 8 years ago. So we didn't really grow up doing a whole lot outside. We went outside and we played ball on the streets and things like that, but we didn't go into nature. We were both kind of typical kids that went to summer camp. So we got like our couple weeks out of the year and came back. And when we moved to Berks County, those first year or two, we spent a lot of times on trails and just exploring, and we just couldn't get over that all of this nature existed so close to our home. And simultaneously, as part of my pediatrics life, I remember reading the book, The Last Child in the Woods, and that was, I was probably still in medical school. That was about 2005, which, if you're not familiar with, I'm sure most of you are, talks about this idea of this nature deficit in children and how harmful it is. And the author of that had no idea what was coming, because about a year or two later was when the iPhone came out, and then the tablets and the screens. And it amazes me in my own practice. Well, I just saw someone said they can't hear me. Can you hear me? You guys can hear me? Okay. And it was amazing in my own practice watching how much of a role these screens were taking. A baby would start crying. The first thing that would happen is the phone would go in front of them. And parents would come to me with children who couldn't talk, but they would talk about how smart their child is because they could find Netflix on the phone and pull up the movie they wanted. My husband, John, and I, we both had, like most parents do before they have a child, kind of clear ideas in our head about certain values that were going to be very important to us. And one of them was that we were going to not participate in a lot of screen time. And it's one of those things that, before you have a child, people are like, wait till your child's born. But we were really committed to it because I had the advantage of seeing it from the other side. And then we had Ari, and Ari is just a bundle of joy, but he has some of his own difficulties. And one of them is that Ari has some sensory issues. Early on in his life, it looked like he was going to go towards autism. And then as he became more verbal, it was clear that wasn't the case. But at his previous preschool, which was a fantastic preschool, Ari was never not in trouble. And one of his biggest issues was that he couldn't sit still. He couldn't keep his hands to himself. And teachers inappropriately thought like he just doesn't listening, he's oppositional. And that really wasn't the case. And anybody who knows Ariana knows that that's not the case. And I remember having read in the New York Times a couple years earlier about forest kindergartens in Europe. And I was like, gosh, I wish we had programs like that. And then I found that Berks Nature had a camp at the time. So we sent him, and all of a sudden, he wasn't in as much trouble. And I realized that Ari was in a position where he was going to fail. He wasn't, his body, and like a lot of little children, especially boys, his body was not meant to sit still. And they were opening up the preschool that year, and Miss Ann had approached us about maybe putting him in, and we'd already committed to the other school, and we're like, oh, I don't know. And we ended up saying, no, we're going to stick with where we are, which was a decision we actually did regret later on. And about halfway through that year, we said, that's it. Next year, which was his pre-K year, we're sending him to the nature school. And the changes were incredible. And Ari, when he starts to get wild, we send him outdoors. That's what he needs. And we make sure outdoors is part of our life every day. So he was in the preschool until the shutdown. And it's just an incredible place. His ability his independence grew, his confidence grew. And really the rule that they had was like, it's not too high as long as you can get yourself down. And I watched him just grow. And, it's not perfect, right? He's still a little bit naughty, and he still gets into a little bit of trouble, but it's incredible how well he does. And as a result, it forced us to get outside because, we have jobs, we get busy, we're tired. And we started as adults to not really do what we had done when we first came, which was spend a lot of time outdoors. And I would say, oh, it's cold, it's rainy. And Ari used to quote Miss Joan all the time and say, Mommy, there's no bad weather, there's just bad clothing. And I learned, it's okay actually to go outside and get wet. Like, it's okay. And when the pandemic hit, the difference really became apparent. So initially, we were just trying to keep as much the same as we could. So without really thinking about why, I said, all right, we're going to go hiking every day because that's what you would be doing every day anyway. So obviously at times I had to be in the hospital, but the times I was in the hospital, we hiked every day. And the days I wasn't there, my husband would take him. And then we started to see that he was just more resilient during this than other kids that we knew. And I really think it was because we were able to take him outdoors. I just saw what somebody wrote. He went outdoors and it just all felt normal. And we would take these long hikes, and I would talk to him sometimes about like, what do you think? Like, do you miss being in school? And he'd be like, yeah, I miss Miss Ann, I miss Miss Joan, I miss Mr. Dave, I miss my friends. But I never got to go on a different trail every single day. And I never got to go this far on this mountain before. And oh my goodness, like we climbed up Neversink, I think every day, like for weeks, because he just wanted to keep getting faster and faster, getting up to the Witch's Hat. And he would say from time to time, he would want to do something, I want to go to the works. I'd be like, buddy, you remember it's closed. And he'd be like, Mommy, it's okay. Cause like, we can always go outside, right? And he would check, outside doesn't close. I'm like, no, outside is never going to close. And I really think that was such a gift to him, to our family, that he had this idea that being outside was okay. And I think even though I knew it in theory as a pediatrician, watching my own child and how well he did and how well we did, because we were being forced outdoors, I think was such a gift. And then we were fortunate this year, he went to kindergarten based in a hybrid program. So we were fortunate we got kind of a little bit of a bonus time. So now on his days that he's virtual, he actually goes back to Berks Nature, gets his work done, and he gets to spend more time outdoors. So we joke, we're like, only for Ari are things actually better in this world. So that's my story. And, we're just so grateful to have Berks Nature, to have a community where we really could, like Ari and I would look at the trail maps and we're like, we really could do a different trail every single day for months and never double them. And just to have this community who's so focused on supporting and making sure that, children in the future are going to be able to experience this. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really enjoyable. I think we all just kind of went into a trance there and listened to your pandemic story. We appreciate your time and you being here. And again, we'll have time for discussion with Sharon and Linda later on in the session. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to our president, Kim Murphy, who will share some Berks Nature updates that happened in 2020. Kim?
Thanks, Tammy, and thanks, Linda and Sharon, for sharing your stories. I'm not sure how I can follow that, but and just an aside, everyone at Berks Nature knows